Before we begin, do you enjoy listening to our show? Consider subscribing on your preferred podcast platform or supporting us on Patreon for as little as $3 a month. Link is in the show notes. I'm Harper Finley, and this is Night Watch Files. The 9th of January, 1982, a Saturday. On the northern outskirts of Sydney, at a pool set along the foreshore of Sydney Harbour, a man named Chris Dawson arrived with his 2 young daughters. He worked there part-time as a lifeguard. That morning, the family had eaten breakfast together at their home in Bayview. Chris's mother-in-law, Helena, made her way to the pool separately, traveling by bus from her home in Clovelly. She arrived at around 2 in the afternoon. A family friend, Phil Day, also came. Chris had invited him a few days earlier. Chris had told them that early that morning, at 7 o'clock, he had driven his wife Lynette to a bus stop. She was going shopping, he said. She would be back in time for lunch. When Helena arrived at the pool, she found Chris agitated. He wanted to know if she had heard from Lynn. She hadn't. For a while, they told themselves she was simply delayed. Still out, still shopping, that she would appear at any moment. Then, at around 3 o'clock, Chris returned from a public telephone kiosk. Those who saw him said he appeared visibly distressed. He told Helena and Phil that he had just received a long-distance call from Lynn. She would not be coming, he said. She needed a few days away, time to think things over. Helena was stunned. She knew her daughter. She knew how Lynn felt about her girls, 2 little children who she adored without reservation. The idea that Lynn would simply disappear, without a word, without her daughters, without any warning at all, it didn't make sense. That afternoon, Phil drove Helena and the 2 Dawson girls back to Helena's house in Clovelly. The children slept there that night. Chris Dawson returned alone to the family home in Bayview. No one had any idea where Lynette was. Lynette Joy Sims was born into an ordinary family in the 1950s and grew up in the seaside suburb of Clovelly in Sydney. She was the 3rd of 4 children, with an older brother Phil, an older sister Pat, with whom she shared a bedroom, and a younger brother Greg. There was a 10-year age gap between the eldest and youngest siblings. Her father, Len, was a former naval officer who transitioned into a career as a high school mathematics teacher, while her mother, Helena, was a stay-at-home mother who nurtured the children. Her childhood world revolved around the local area and the beach. The Sims family were all avid swimmers, and Lynn was described by her brother Greg as a true water baby. She and her sister Pat would frequently walk around Thompson's Bay to South Coogee to swim, braving the water even in the middle of winter. During the summers, they swam at the Sydney Ladies Swimming Club or at the Bogey Hole, while their mother kept a watchful eye over them. Lynn also participated in a community-minded family tradition, taking her turn after her older siblings to mow the lawn for an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Thalberg. Lynn walked 20 minutes every day to attend Clovelly Public School, where she excelled as the marching captain and sports captain for her group. Within the family, she was the designated organizer who happily took charge of special events and birthday parties. Her siblings described her as an incredibly bright, caring, and principled young woman. However, unlike her 3 siblings who were peacemakers like their mother, Lynn took after her father's strength. She was outspoken, called a spade, and was never afraid to stand her ground if she believed she was right. For her secondary education, Lynn attended Sydney Girls High School, where her path finally crossed with Chris Dawson, a student at the neighboring Sydney Boys High School. The 2 teenagers met at a school dance while they were both serving as prefects. Their relationship quickly evolved into a serious romance, and Chris was seamlessly welcomed into the Sims family. During their dating years, Chris presented himself as a charmer who knew exactly the right things to say. Lynn's younger brother, Greg, remembered Chris as being incredibly loving towards Lynn, noting that the young couple was constantly holding hands, cuddling, and joking together. Chris became a regular fixture at Sims' family get-togethers, and Lynn's mother, Helena, absolutely adored him. Helena thought highly of the handsome young rugby player and was thrilled that her daughter had found someone she was so deeply in love with. However, not everyone in their circle was entirely won over by his charm. Lynn's older brother Phil's girlfriend, Linda, distinctly disliked Chris from the start, later noting that he possessed a tremendous ego and would relentlessly and unkindly tease Lynn's younger brother, Greg. Phil also recalled hearing troubling rumors about Chris and his identical twin brother, Paul, during this dating period. Phil had heard that the twins would boast about tricking the girls they took out by swapping places on dates, confident that the girls wouldn't know the difference. Phil hoped this deceptive behavior would stop once Chris and Lynn became engaged. Despite these undercurrents, they remained devoted high school sweethearts, and their courtship ultimately culminated in their marriage on the 26th of March 1970 at St. Jude's Anglican Church in Randwick. In 1971, the young couple broke ground on their first home together, building a house on Toronto Avenue in the Northern Beaches suburb of Cromer. To the outside world, it was the picture of suburban aspiration. Lynn was a natural homemaker. When family visited the Cromer house, they were struck by her warmth, her gentle voice, and how beautifully everything was presented. She was the consummate host and a devoted, caring nurse, while Chris played the role of the charismatic, affectionate husband who knew exactly the right things to say. Yet even in those early years, cracks in the facade of domestic bliss were beginning to show. Chris and his identical twin brother, Paul, possessed an unusual, fiercely competitive connection, mirroring each other's lives right down to their careers and part-time jobs. Any extra money the twins made from side gigs like modeling and TV ads was funneled into a secretive joint bank account they dubbed the Twinnies account. This financial exclusion caused quiet unrest for Lynn, who confided in her sister-in-law that she was not allowed access to a bank book or cash. Deliberately kept cash poor by her husband, Lynn was left heavily reliant on her bank card for basic purchases. In one telling incident from those early days, Lynn excitedly bought herself a kitchen mixer, only for Chris to become furious that she had spent the money. Rather than defending her daughter's independence, Lynn's mother urged her to be more compliant, reinforcing a tragic generational belief that the husband was always right. Adding to the silent pressures of their early married life was a devastating medical prognosis. The couple, desperate to start a family, were told they would not be able to have children. It was a heavy, damaging blow for a young woman who wanted nothing more than to be a mother, prompting them to even apply to adopt a child. Despite this heartbreak, their suburban aspirations continued to grow. Between 1975 and 1976, Chris and Lynn decided to build a second, much grander house at 2 Gilwinga Drive in Bayview. This move raised eyebrows among Lynn's family, as the couple paid more than $30,000 for a steep, rocky, and bushy block of land that was highly isolated. The location's remoteness significantly shifted the power dynamics in their marriage. Because Lynn did not have a driver's license, the move to Bayview left her completely dependent on Chris for transport. Chris deliberately maintained this isolation by never getting around to teaching her how to drive, ensuring he had her exactly where he wanted her. Their transition to the Bayview house was soon followed by a miraculous turn of events. After undergoing surgery to aid her fertility, Lynn unexpectedly fell pregnant. It was a massive surprise to the entire family when she attended her brother Greg's wedding in late 1976, visibly expecting. In 1977, she gave birth via cesarean section to their first daughter, Chanel. Initially, the arrival of their baby brought undeniable joy. Lynn, whom her sister-in-law described as a natural earth mum, found her absolute world in her new child, and Chris appeared completely adoring as they sat together with their baby. Lynn was deeply house-proud, constantly buying small trinkets to elevate the Bayview home she loved so much. She forged a close bond with her neighbor, Julie Andrew, who moved next door in 1979. Because their properties were unfenced, Lynn would frequently wander through the bushland for a cup of tea with Julie while watching the children play, a picture of suburban tranquility that soon expanded with the arrival of her second daughter, Amy. Yet, behind the closed doors of their isolated property, the controlling and cruel undertones of her husband persisted and worsened. Chris relentlessly belittled Lynn over the natural weight she had gained during her pregnancy, making her feel terribly about her appearance and telling her she was too fat, even though she was no larger than a size 14. He used cruel songs with double meanings to intentionally antagonize her, and would later brazenly refer to her as fatso. His financial grip also remained absolute. He refused to allow her to spend money on simple necessities like altering a dress for a family wedding, forcing her to borrow clothes from a friend. Despite the mounting emotional abuse, Lynn desperately tried to paint a rosy picture to the outside world. She wanted to protect the revered public image of the successful, handsome Dawson twins and their perfect families, shielding her own parents and friends from the grim reality of her daily life. Chris Dawson's arrival as a physical education teacher at Cromer High School in 1979 placed him in an environment where his status as a charismatic former rugby league star afforded him immense power. Behind the scenes, the school harbored a dark, misogynistic beach culture where a pack of male teachers in their 20s and 30s routinely preyed upon female students. Within this toxic environment, teachers often shared a predatory camaraderie, and Chris's celebrity status made him a revered figure among young girls who were conditioned by the culture to be grateful for the attention. During his very first year at the school, Chris's roving eye landed on a 15-year-old Year 10 student named Jenny Carlson, a pseudonym that extends to her immediate family used in early source material. Unlike the confident, in-crowd girls, Jenny was a softer, easier target who lacked self-assurance. Chris played the long game. When Jenny entered Year 11 in 1980, he specifically arranged to be the teacher for her sports coaching class. And from the very beginning of the term, he began grooming her by singling her out, paying her special attention, and inserting himself into her activities. At the time, Jenny was a highly vulnerable 16-year-old enduring a miserable home life due to a physically and emotionally abusive stepfather. Believing her popular teacher was simply a caring type of person, she approached Chris to talk about her domestic struggles, initially forming a relationship based on counseling. He leveraged this dynamic to gain her trust, and soon after, he asked her to start babysitting his two young daughters, Chanel and Amy, who were then just 3 and 1 years old, on weekends at his Bayview home. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. In the early 1980s, Lynn found a sense of purpose and a supportive community working part-time as a registered nurse at the Warrywood Children's Center. Her co-workers, manager Barbara Cruz, along with Sue Strath, Annette Leary, and Anna Grantham, became close confidants as the facade of her perfect marriage began to fracture. To these women, Lynn was a highly capable and caring professional, but it was increasingly obvious to them that she was losing her self-esteem and holding on by a thread at home. Behind the closed doors of their isolated Bayview property, the emotional abuse Chris inflicted upon Lynn had escalated into physical violence, terrifying details of which she quietly shared with her friends. Anna Grantham vividly remembered Lynn recounting a horrifying moment when an angry Chris grabbed her by the hair and shoved her face into the mud surrounding their newly built swimming pool, holding her down until she felt she couldn't breathe. Despite these violent outbursts, Lynn's absolute devotion to Chris and her desperation to save her family kept her firmly in a state of denial, and instead of fleeing, she desperately sought to appease him. The babysitting arrangement with Jenny quickly evolved into a consuming weekly routine. Chris would personally collect her from her home on Saturday afternoons, drive her to the Bayview property, and frequently have her stay overnight in a spare bedroom before driving her back on Sunday afternoons. Unusually, these babysitting duties became a fixture of the weekend, even on occasions when both Chris and Lynn remained at home. Lynn, who was naturally warm and compassionate, welcomed the teenager and was sympathetic to her plight, believing they were providing a safe haven for a troubled student. Through this regular presence in the house, Jenny virtually became a member of the family, getting to know Lynn well and forging ties with Chris's twin brother, Paul, who lived just down the street. However, the babysitting duties provided Chris with the perfect cover to groom the teenager and seamlessly integrate her into his domestic life. While Jenny was brought in ostensibly to watch the children, the arrangement facilitated Chris's infatuation, leading to driving lessons, kisses at the beach, and eventually a sexual relationship that began in late 1980. Throughout 1981, the grooming of his 16-year-old student escalated into an ongoing sexual affair that took place primarily in his car, while she continued her regular weekend babysitting duties at the Bayview home. As the year progressed, Chris's intense infatuation with the teenager became publicly visible, increasingly marginalizing his wife. The affair had a devastating impact on the marriage, pushing a desperate Lynn to fight for her husband's fading attention. Acutely aware of Chris's critical remarks about her appearance, she went out of her way to lose weight and buy new clothes, even modeling racy lingerie for him to try and bring the magic into the romance again. Despite her efforts to save the relationship, Chris completely withdrew physical affection from his wife. Lynn confided in her sister-in-law that Chris had not been near her for 6 weeks. When a heartbroken Lynn confronted him to ask if there was someone else in his life, Chris brazenly lied and insisted there was not. The psychological toll on Lynn became painfully apparent to those close to the family. During the birthday party for their daughters in July 1981, Lynn showed obvious signs of strain as she tried to single-handedly host the large gathering. Meanwhile, Chris completely ignored her, choosing instead to sit outside on the steps with his twin brother to console an upset Jenny. By early October, Lynn's mother, Helena, noted in her diary that she had witnessed Chris comforting Jenny on a bed in the study and expressed frustration that Chris was driving the teenager to work at night while Lynn remained visibly distressed. The fragile domestic situation reached a tipping point in October 1981 when Jenny suffered a violent altercation with her abusive stepfather. Chris seized on the teenager's domestic dispute as an excuse to move her into the Bayview house indefinitely. Recognizing the grave danger to her already crumbling relationship, Lynn pleaded with her husband to reconsider, asking, "Don't you think we should sort out our own problems before we bring any more problems into the house?" Her desperate objections were entirely ignored. Chris maintained absolute control over the household and was determined that the schoolgirl was moving in. The childcare center became the sounding board for Lynn's anxieties regarding this new situation. When Lynn told her coworkers that Chris had moved the 16-year-old student into their home under the guise of helping a troubled youth, alarm bells rang immediately for her friends. Sue Strath bluntly confronted Lynn after hearing that Jenny had been swimming naked in the family pool, urging Lynn to kick the teenager out and asking if she didn't think something was going on between them. Driven by mounting suspicion, Lynn even left the child care center early in a taxi one day during the school holidays to check on Chris and Jenny at the house, returning to work looking deeply pensive and worried. Sometime between the second and third week of December 1981, Lynn finished a game of doubles tennis with a group of women that included Rosalind McLaughlin. As they wrapped up their match, Lynn was still wearing her tennis gear, which inadvertently exposed terrifying evidence of physical abuse. On top of her thigh, Rosalind noticed a really large grapefruit-sized bruise, alongside distinct bruising on her upper arm. Rosalind, who had met Lynn through Marilyn Dawson and had only babysat for the Dawsons once or twice, was not a close confidant. Yet the sheer magnitude of the injuries immediately alarmed her. She wondered how someone could sustain such massive marks, but felt she did not know Lynn intimately enough to pry into the cause. It wasn't just the physical injuries that were striking. The normally vibrant young mother looked tired, drawn, and worried, appearing to have completely lost her sparkle. Adding to the disturbing scene was Lynn's uncharacteristic and desperate behavior. She urgently pleaded with her tennis-playing friends to go back to the isolated Bayview house with her. Rosalind distinctly sensed the fear and desperation in Lynn's voice as she begged. But during the hectic week leading up to Christmas, neither Rosalind nor any of the other women could spare the time to accompany her. Lynn's suspicions about her husband's affair had been quietly mounting throughout the latter half of 1981, fueled by the whispered warnings of those around her. The whispers grew louder when a female teacher from Cromer High approached Lynn at an after-school event and explicitly told her about the illicit relationship. Yet the undeniable breaking point arrived when, leaving her shift at the childcare center early due to a headache, Lynn caught a taxi home, walked up the driveway, and stepped into her own bedroom to discover Chris and the student together in a compromising position. Lynn's reaction was a tragic, desperate scramble to salvage the shattered remains of her marriage. Incredibly, Chris managed to talk his way out of the immediate bedroom confrontation, and a devastated Lynn seemingly chose to believe his excuses. But the reality soon became impossible to ignore, prompting a heartbroken Lynn to finally confront the teenager directly, telling Jenny, "You've been taking liberties with my husband," and ordering her out of the house. Meanwhile, Chris and his twin brother orchestrated a deceptive double life to keep the teenager close. After Lynn forced Jenny out in November 1981, Paul Dawson and his wife Marilyn secretly took the schoolgirl into their home. The family maintained a cruel guise, forcing Jenny to wake early and hide in the nearby bushland so Paul's children wouldn't accidentally mention her presence to Lynn. Throughout this, Chris was actively forging an escape plan to leave his marriage and move into a rental with his teenage babysitter, putting down a $500 bond for a flat in North Manly. However, his exit strategy was momentarily complicated by a cold financial calculation regarding the Bayview home he co-owned with Lynn. Jenny later recounted overhearing Chris on the telephone with a solicitor, asking if he would forfeit the property if he walked away. Upon finishing the call, Chris concluded, "If I leave, she gets the house. I'm better off staying in the house." Despite this realization, the urge to abandon his family culminated in a callous departure just 2 days before Christmas. During the day on December 23rd, while nobody else was home, Chris and Jenny packed their possessions into his car and drove off from Gilwinga Drive, fully intending to make a new life together in Queensland. Meanwhile, Lynn was left completely stranded at work with a massive load of Christmas groceries. After waiting an hour for Chris to collect her, she caught a taxi home only to discover his clothes missing and a note left on the bed. In it, Chris instructed his devastated wife, "Don't paint too black a picture of me to the girls." As Lynn tried to explain to her young daughters that their father had suddenly gone on holiday, Chris and Jenny were driving through the night. Yet as they reached Murwillumbah in northern New South Wales, the immense pressure of the illicit escape broke the teenager. Jenny broke out in severe stress-induced hives, scratching all over her body, and confessed to Chris that she missed her family and could not go through with their plan. They immediately turned the car around, driving through the night once again to reach Sydney in the early hours of Christmas Day. Returning to the northern beaches, they sought refuge at the home of Chris's brother, Paul. The situation was so secretive and absurd that Chris and Jenny were forced to hide inside a wardrobe while Paul and Marilyn's children unwrapped their Christmas presents. That night, utilizing the keys Paul possessed as a teacher, Chris and Jenny slept secretly on the floor of the Forest High School gymnasium. The disastrous escape attempt finally ended on Boxing Day morning, when Jenny asked to go home and Chris dropped her off at her mother's house. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. While confiding her deep distress to her sister Pat over the telephone, a frantic Lynn described Chris's escalating rage and his black eyes flashing, even suggesting he needed to see a doctor for his sudden, inexplicable outbursts. Yet, despite facing a collapsing marriage and having very little money, she steadfastly refused to leave the Bayview house, telling her sister she was terrified she might not be there if Chrissy came back. When Chris's illicit escape unraveled due to the teenager's severe homesickness and he returned to Sydney, Lynn was eager to repair their fractured relationship. In a desperate bid to salvage the marriage, the couple agreed to attend a marriage guidance counselor in Manly on January 8, 1982. As they rode alone in an elevator up to the counselor's office, Chris's seething resentment boiled over. He shoved Lynn forcefully up against the wall, grabbed her tightly by the throat, and delivered a terrifying ultimatum. "I'm only doing this once, and if it doesn't work, I'm getting rid of you." Lynn's absolute devotion to Chris and her desperation to keep her family intact blinded her to the grave reality of his threat. Despite the physical assault leaving visible bruises on her neck, she later recounted the horrifying elevator incident to her co-workers at the childcare center with a heartbreaking sense of denial. She attempted to laugh the assault off, pretending to her friends that Chris was only being silly and would never actually hurt her. Instead of fleeing the abuse, she emerged from the counseling session holding hands with her husband, returning to work looking bright and bubbly, and telling her colleagues she felt positive that she could finally save her marriage. Meanwhile, following the disastrous, aborted escape to Queensland, Jenny found herself at a crisis point and desperate for space to clear her head. She wanted to break off the consuming relationship with her older teacher, unsure if he was actually going to leave his wife and secure his own place. Seeking a refuge where she could think, she called her father, Graham Carlson, asking for permission to join her sisters and their friends at the family's caravan in Southwest Rocks. The coastal getaway provided a brief illusion of freedom. Physically out of Chris's reach and temporarily removed from his intense influence, Jenny felt her desire to end the illicit affair growing stronger with each passing day. However, Chris refused to relinquish his emotional grip on the schoolgirl. Before she even departed for the trip, he had desperately begged her to call him reverse charges daily, dramatically declaring, "I'll die if I don't speak to you every day." Trapped by his demands, Jenny maintained this routine, walking to a public phone box near the caravan park to update him on her holiday activities. During these calls, Chris focused entirely on her, questioning who she was with and insisting that he suffered from hives and gastric problems, missed her terribly, and could not live without her. On the weekend of January 10, 1982, following the fateful Saturday at Northbridge Baths, Helena and her two young granddaughters, Chanel and Amy, were sequestered at the Sims family home in Clovelly. They had been driven there by Chris's friend Phil Day after Chris delivered the shocking news that Lynn had supposedly called the pool kiosk to say she needed a few days away to think things over. Trapped in a state of naive hope, the devastated mother simply could not comprehend that she would never see her beloved daughter again, and the two little girls, completely innocent and vulnerable, were left wondering. Meanwhile, Chris immediately made his way north, driving to a caravan park at Southwest Rocks. He arrived at the coastal campsite to collect his teenage lover, Jenny, chillingly informing the girl that Lynn was gone and never coming back. He then brought the teenager straight back to the northern beaches to permanently take his wife's place in the matrimonial home. Stepping back through the front door of 2 Gilwinga Drive, Jenny found the Bayview house exactly as she had left it, yet profoundly altered by the absence of its matriarch. Thrust immediately into the role of de facto wife, the teenager slept that very first night, and every night thereafter, in Lynn's bed. The master bedroom remained a haunting shrine to the missing woman, with the walk-in wardrobe and drawers still packed to the brim with Lynn's clothing and underwear. Sitting amidst these intimate possessions was a basket holding Lynn's nursing badge and her precious diamond rings. In the ensuing days, Jenny was told she was allowed to go through her predecessor's wardrobe and keep whatever she wanted, while the remainder of Lynn's life was unceremoniously stuffed into garbage bags to be dumped at her mother's home. The crushing reality of her new domestic imprisonment quickly set in. Still a child herself, Jenny was wholly unprepared to take over the care of Lynn's two little girls. Overwhelmed by the sudden, heavy demands of motherhood, she had to consult a cookbook simply to figure out how to prepare mashed potatoes. While Chris enjoyed the remainder of his January summer holidays before returning to teach at Cromer High, Jenny was cemented into her role as the household's full-time housekeeper, and as she would later describe it, Dawson's sex slave. Even during those surreal early days of taking Lynn's place, the couple made a bizarre visit to a women's refuge in DY. When a counselor bluntly advised Chris that he and the teenager should part ways and he should let her go, his arrogant defiance flared. Leaving the refuge, he told Jenny, "We'll show her. We'll make a go of it. We're not going to let this die a natural death," sealing the vulnerable teenager's fate in the empty house. For Helena Sims, the agonizing months following her daughter's sudden vanishing were defined by profound grief, sleepless nights, and a desperate, blinding denial. Unable to comprehend that she would never see her again, the devastated mother initially clung to Chris's narrative that Lynn had simply suffered a breakdown and needed time away to think. To maintain contact with her two young granddaughters, Helena endured deep humiliation, taking public transport to the northern beaches to watch Chris play football, only to be cruelly ignored and ostracized by the Dawson family, who had swiftly replaced Lynn with Jenny. Her heartbreak was compounded when Chris eventually banned her from seeing the children at their school, prompting a grieving Helena to write a searing letter accusing him of breaking Lynn's spirit and lamenting that the girls were now lost to her and their pretend mother, Jenny. While Helena sought refuge in the impossible hope of Lynn's return, the missing woman's friends and colleagues harbored far darker, more immediate suspicions. At the child care center where Lynn worked, co-workers like Barbara Cruz, Sue Strath, and Anna Grantham entirely rejected Chris's suggestion that the devoted mother had run off to join a religious commune. They knew Lynn was a practical, non-religious professional who absolutely adored her children, and they quickly concluded that Chris had murdered her and buried her on the 1-acre Bayview property. Next-door neighbor Julie Andrew was equally adamant, noting that Lynn had left without taking a single pair of underpants, any money, or the little girls whose hands she never would have let go of voluntarily. To Julie and the others, the motive was brutally clear. Chris wanted Jenny, and to get Jenny he had to completely eliminate Lynn. Yet, trapped by the era's social conditioning and a fear of Chris's physical power and close police connections, these women quietly carried their horrifying suspicions without formally demanding immediate police intervention. Within the broader Sims family, opinions fractured under the weight of the tragedy. Lynn's father, Len, was unconvinced by the facade from day one, bluntly declaring the bastard has done her in. Similarly, Lynn's eldest brother, Phil, remained certain that his sister was buried in the backyard, specifically under 9 feet of excavation fill deposited by a neighbor at Chris's behest. However, Lynn's siblings Pat and Greg, geographically isolated and trying to protect their own young families from the consuming black hole of the mystery, initially struggled between trusting the charismatic Chris and confronting the unthinkable reality of foul play. On January 15th, exactly 1 week after Lynn was last seen, Chris called his distressed mother-in-law, Helena, to report that he had just spoken with Lynn. According to Chris, Lynn had called to say she had been north and needed more time. Chris told Helena that he had snapped at his wife, asking, "How much more bloody time do you need?" He claimed he begged Lynn not to hang up, pleaded for her to come home because they all needed her, and urged her to ring your mum. In Chris's telling, Lynn simply replied, "I can't," before hanging up. Despite facing the sudden, inexplicable absence of his wife and the mother of his two young daughters, Chris Dawson entirely avoided the authorities until Helena's urgings finally pushed him to act. On the morning of 18th of February 1982, nearly 6 weeks after Lynn's disappearance, Chris walked into the Mona Vale police station at 9:15 a.m. and officially reported her missing to Sergeant Gibbons. However, instead of using the true date she was last seen, the weekend of 8th and 9th of January, Chris reported that Lynn had been missing since 15th of January 1982, treating his final phone call with her as the official date of her vanishing. In making the report, Chris calmly laid out a narrative designed to portray Lynn as an unstable wife abandoning her family. He recounted to the desk sergeant the circumstances of dropping Lynn off at 7 a.m. on Saturday, January 9th, so she could go shopping, her subsequent failure to meet the family at Northbridge Baths as planned, and the purported phone calls where she claimed she needed time away to think. He also told police that a check of Lynn's bank card statements revealed she had used the card on 12th of January. Concluding his report, Chris formally suggested to the police that his wife had likely run off to join a religious group on the North Coast. The local police, accepting the word of the charismatic former rugby league star without question, did the bare minimum in response, treating the report strictly as a case of a runaway wife rather than raising any suspicions of foul play. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. From that moment and into the ensuing months, the Sims family found themselves stuck in a heartbreaking state of paralyzed hope and agonizing compliance. Despite the glaring anomalies, the Sims family did not initially pressure the police to investigate Chris. Lynn's brother Greg, a serving police officer at the time, felt his hands were tied by protocol. Whenever he contacted the missing persons unit, he was brushed off because Chris, as the legal next of kin, was the sole recipient of police information. The overriding factor that kept the Sims family compliant was a terrifying tightrope walk. They desperately wanted to maintain access to Lynn's two little girls, Chanel and Amy, but the Dawson clan quickly closed ranks to protect Chris's revered public image, with Paul and his wife Marilyn adopting the view that Chris was the fair-haired boy who could do no wrong, placing the blame squarely on Lynn for supposedly walking out. As the months of 1982 dragged on following Lynn's disappearance, Chris Dawson brazenly maintained the deceptive facade of an abandoned, heartbroken husband while cementing his teenage lover's place in the Bayview home. In a staggering display of manipulation, he placed a tiny classified advertisement in the Daily Telegraph on March 27th, the day after what would have been his wedding anniversary, pleading, "Lynn, I love you. We all miss you. Please ring. We want you home, Chris." When Jenny pressed him about Lynn's whereabouts, Chris casually dismissed the mother of his children, stating, "She's an adult. She's entitled to leave if she wants to. If she doesn't want to be found, I'm not going to worry." The scandalous reality of a physical education teacher openly living with his former student soon became impossible for education authorities to ignore. During the first half of 1982, Chris was quietly transferred from Cromer High to nearby Beacon Hill High to manage the mounting rumors and embarrassment. Yet behind closed doors, the domestic situation was far from a romantic fairy tale. Frustrated by the burden of her new responsibilities, Jenny complained to a worker from a women's refuge, expressing her wish that Lynn would simply return to collect the children so that she and Chris could live happily ever after on their own. Meanwhile, the Sims family was subjected to a cruel emotional roller coaster. In September 1982, this fragile dynamic was tested when Helena traveled to the country town of Aberdeen to stay with Greg and Marilyn, bringing her two young granddaughters along for a week. Chris called the house in a highly agitated state, aggressively accusing his mother-in-law of taking the girls away to facilitate a secret rendezvous with Lynn. Marilyn had to calm the irate husband down, assuring him that the girls were perfectly safe and there was no secret meeting. The grim reality of Chris's intentions was unceremoniously dumped on the Sims family's doorstep the following month. In October 1982, Chris drove across the harbor bridge to Helena and Len's Clovelly home, carrying plastic garbage bags stuffed with what remained of Lynn's life. As a devastated Helena watched, Chris dumped the bags in the hallway. They contained Lynn's intimate belongings, including her nursing badges, contact lenses, reading glasses, and dirty gardening gloves. During the callous delivery, Chris offered no comfort to his grieving in-laws, keeping his head down and flashing angry, big black eyes at Greg. To ensure his newfound freedom remained unchallenged, Chris actively deceived investigating authorities. In August 1982, the Missing Persons Unit requested a full profile on Lynn. Chris provided a handwritten antecedent report in which he spun a web of lies designed to paint Lynn as an unstable, runaway wife. He completely airbrushed his illicit affair with a schoolgirl from the narrative, falsely claiming that his marital problems stemmed from Lynn's bank card spending and financial matters. During 1983, Chris Dawson successfully used the legal system to permanently erase Lynn from his life and secure her wealth. He briefed a solicitor, his former football teammate Jeff Linden, to initiate divorce proceedings against his missing wife in absentia. The divorce was finalized by July 1983, culminating in a property settlement where Chris took the entirety of Lynn's assets and assumed sole ownership of the Bayview home, completely bypassing the need for her signature on any sale agreements. While Chris consolidated his legal and financial control, his relationship with the teenage babysitter, Jenny, continued to involve other young girls. In July 1983, Jenny approached a former Forest High student, Alice, asking if she would join her in bed with Chris as a birthday present for him. Alice also noted that on at least 2 occasions in 1983, she met Chris, Paul, and other teachers for group sex. On January 15, 1984, exactly 2 years after Lynn's disappearance, Chris and Jenny were married at the house in Bayview. Chris repurposed the diamonds from Lynn's engagement and eternity rings to create a new wedding ring for his teenage bride. The couple honeymooned in Western Samoa, and later that year, Jenny became pregnant with their daughter. By 1984, the relationship between Chris and the Sims family had completely broken down into open hostility. Lynn's father, Len, sent Chris a letter calling in a financial loan he had extended to Chris and Lynn when they were newlyweds. Desperate to maintain contact, Helena went to the school in 1984 with a birthday parcel for her eldest granddaughter, Chanel. As she called out to the child, Jenny grabbed the girls by the hands, hurried them toward the car, and publicly yelled at Helena, "We don't want anything from you after the nasty letter you sent." An incensed Helena snapped back, calling Jenny a little slut, and later wrote a heartbreaking letter to Chris in August 1984, lamenting that he had wielded a big stick to cut her out of the children's lives entirely. By late 1984, Chris and his twin brother, Paul, decided to leave the northern beaches behind. After initially looking at property in Kincumber on the Central Coast, the brothers settled on buying acreages near Dreamworld on the Gold Coast in Queensland. Having secured total ownership of the Bayview property through the divorce, Chris sold the house, and at the end of 1984, he and Jenny packed up to start their new lives in Queensland. In early 1985, Chris had seamlessly slipped back into his familiar role as a popular physical education teacher and rugby league coach, this time at Kebra Park High School on the Gold Coast. Soon after, the couple moved into a newly built home on acreage near the Dreamworld theme park, establishing a bizarre, mirrored existence alongside Chris's twin brother Paul, who was teaching at nearby Kumbaba High School. The twin brothers' properties were completed within a month of each other in mid-1985, and both families boasted 3 daughters, swimming pools, tennis courts, and even Dalmatian dogs from the exact same litter. Yet behind the facade of this idyllic Queensland lifestyle, Jenny was becoming deeply isolated in a home she would later describe as the compound. While Chris was out teaching and soaking up the adoration of his students, Jenny remained entirely cut off from the outside world, tasked with managing the household and raising Lynn's two young daughters alongside her own newborn baby, Michaela, who was born in 1985. The heavy burden of motherhood quickly caused the domestic situation to fray. Jenny struggled with the crushing reality of raising her predecessor's children, later admitting that she could not treat Chris's daughters the same as her own, a stark division that Chris refused to accept. The environment inside the house grew increasingly tense, with Lynn's young daughters walking on eggshells, too terrified to make a sound, and living in a constant state of foreboding around their stepmother. For Jenny, the fresh start in Queensland rapidly morphed into a frightening era of coercive control. Friends would later liken her highly monitored, artificial existence to that of a captive in the Stepford Wives, noting that Chris hovered like a dark menace over her every move, constantly checking that she was performing her duties correctly and resenting any friends who came to visit. He treated his young wife as a possession, dictating her friendships, forbidding her from wearing a two-piece swimsuit, and refusing to allow her to go to the beach alone. Chris even went so far as to destroy her plain cotton underwear with scissors, demanding instead that she dress up for him in specific ways, including as a schoolgirl, to satisfy his voracious sexual appetite. Trapped in this isolated property with an explosive, narcissistic husband whom she could not say no to, the young woman who had once viewed Chris as a safe haven found herself entirely imprisoned in the life he had stolen from Lynn. Lynn's former co-worker, Sue Strath, formally lodged a written complaint with the New South Wales Ombudsman on the 5th of February 1985, writing under her then-married name, Susan Browett. After waiting 3 years for authorities to act, she was driven by profound frustration that police had failed to properly investigate Lynn Dawson's disappearance and were completely ignoring the glaring anomalies surrounding her husband, Chris. In her letter, Sue questioned how police could blindly accept Chris's story that Lynn had voluntarily abandoned her adored children and her home to join a religious group. She highlighted that Chris had moved his 16-year-old schoolgirl lover into the marital house the following week and urged the ombudsman to investigate why Lynn's workmates were never questioned and why Chris's word was accepted as the sole evidence of her whereabouts. Despite the clear red flags raised in her complaint, the ombudsman's inquiry ultimately resulted in a superficial bureaucratic cover-up, and the file was closed just months later with no meaningful police action taken. When the ombudsman's office referred the sensitive complaint to Police Commissioner John Avery, the police force responded defensively to protect themselves. Inspector Jeff Shattles produced an internal police memo that merely regurgitated Chris Dawson's fabricated narrative. The police review failed to ask why detectives hadn't interviewed Chris, Jenny, or other witnesses, and entirely ignored the fact that Chris's relationship with his student constituted the serious criminal offense of carnal knowledge. Instead of identifying these massive investigative failures, Inspector Shattles' report concluded that all avenues of investigation were covered and even attempted to blame Lynn's family for supposedly not raising suspicions earlier. Relying entirely on this inadequate police response, the Ombudsman's office did not challenge the detectives or push for further answers. In June 1985, police officially advised the Ombudsman that further inquiries were fruitless, and an officer at the Ombudsman informed Sue that police had no new leads, permanently closing the file. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. By early 1987, Jenny finally began to push back against her imprisonment. Desperate for Michaela to have contact with other children, she defied Chris's explicit orders and started taking her toddler to a local playgroup. This small act of rebellion provided her first real taste of freedom away from the family home, opening up a different lifestyle and a window to the outside world. Through visits to Dreamworld, she forged a close friendship with a stage show worker named Tony Melrose, and the two women began going to lunch, doing aerobics, and playing in an indoor cricket team. Chris fiercely resented the time his young wife spent with Tony and reacted to her newfound independence with escalating jealousy, control, and violence. The domestic tension reached a terrifying climax during an incident in 1989 after Jenny attended a lingerie party with Tony and purchased a pair of G-string underwear. When Jenny brought them home and put them on, Chris demanded she promise to only wear them for him. When Jenny pushed back and declared she would wear them whenever she liked, an enraged Chris grabbed her by the neck and began choking her. It was during this violent assault that Jenny voiced the dark suspicion that had been quietly mounting in her mind, telling her husband, "You got rid of your first wife, you could easily get rid of me." Chris immediately stood stock still and warned her, "Don't say things like that." For Jenny, the terrifying parallels between her own heavily monitored, abusive marriage and the torment she had witnessed Chris inflict upon Lynn became impossible to ignore. She recognized the same cruel taunting, financial control, and isolation that had preceded her predecessor's disappearance, and she lived in fear for her own life and that of her daughter. Realizing she needed to escape before she suffered the same fate as Lynn, she quietly sought legal advice regarding a divorce. Following a brief trip to Sydney in mid-January 1990 to consult with friends and family, Jenny made her final decision. On February 1, 1990, she packed her belongings and drove away from the Gold Coast property for good with her daughter. Fleeing back to Sydney's northern beaches, the terrified young mother sought help at a women's refuge in DY, where she confided her chilling secrets to a caseworker named Pam Eckford. Determined to expose the man who had controlled her since she was a 16-year-old schoolgirl, Jenny asked Pam to help her contact Lynn's grieving family. At Jenny's behest, Pam called Lynn's mother, who initially refused any contact, still blaming the former babysitter for the breakdown of her daughter's marriage. However, Marilyn Sims gently convinced her husband Greg that they needed to listen, leading to a pivotal, hours-long meeting at a neutral location on the Central Coast. For Jenny, the meeting was profoundly cathartic. By unburdening her horrifying secrets, detailing Chris's coercive control and his frantic rush to move her into the matrimonial bed, she felt a massive weight lift from her shoulders. The biggest revelation she made was that sometime prior to Lynn's disappearance, Chris Dawson and Jenny were out driving together. Chris drove them to a location, possibly on the western side of Sydney, and parked outside a hotel or pub. He left the teenage Jenny waiting alone in the car while he walked up some stairs and went inside the building. When he returned to the vehicle, Chris made a horrifying confession. He told his teenage lover, "I was going to get a hitman to kill Lynn, but I couldn't because innocent people would get hurt." Pam Eckford, who believed every word Jenny said, noted that the young woman finally felt happy and at peace, knowing she had done the right thing by exposing the truth. For the Sims family, Jenny's disclosure shattered their lingering, desperate hopes that Lynn had simply walked away, replacing their blind trust in Chris with the devastating realization that he had likely murdered her. Most significantly, these explosive secrets became the direct catalyst that finally triggered the very first homicide investigation into Lynn's disappearance in 1990. Armed with Jenny's allegations, Homicide Squad detectives Paul Mager and Stuart Wilkins began interviewing Lynn's siblings and conducted a survey of the Bayview house. This probe culminated on January 15, 1991, when the detectives traveled to Queensland to formally question Chris Dawson on videotape. During the interview, Chris categorically denied Jenny's chilling allegations that he had sought a hitman, dismissing her account as a complete and utter fabrication. Instead, he successfully deflected the detectives by dropping a tantalizing piece of information. He claimed that Sue Butlin, the wife of his football mate Ray Butlin, had seen Lynn alive at a fruit barn on the Central Coast. Incredibly, detectives never interviewed Sue Butland to verify this purported sighting before she passed away later in the decade. When Detective Mager raised the claim with the Director of Public Prosecutions and the coroner, he was advised that the investigation should probably not proceed unless they could definitively refute that evidence. Consequently, the murder probe was quietly abandoned based solely on Dawson's word. Adding to the profound failures of this era, the entire homicide squad brief of evidence, including all the written statements meticulously gathered from Lynn's family, friends, and other witnesses during the 1990 and 1991 inquiries, inexplicably vanished. Hundreds of hours of investigative work were lost to negligence or corruption, and the only tangible record that survived police custody was the videotape of Chris Dawson's interview. While the official investigation lay dormant, Lynn's family continued to agonizingly search for answers in the dark. In 1993, Lynn's brother Greg Sims, then working the night shift in police radio operations in Newcastle, sent a desperate memo to Detective Wilkins. He pleaded for cadaver dogs, which were currently being used to search for backpacker victims in the Belanglo State Forest, to be sent to search the Bayview property for his sister's remains, but his request yielded no immediate action. It took until 1998 for the case to finally be resurrected, driven by the relentless badgering of Lynn's loyal childcare colleague Sue Strath. For years, Sue had pleaded with her friend Helen Holm, whose husband Paul had recently been promoted to crime manager at the DY police station. To appease Sue during Missing Persons Week, Holm handed the scant, decimated file to one of his most tenacious officers, Detective Senior Constable Damian Loon. Despite the missing documents, Loon read the transcript and immediately concluded that something gravely suspicious had happened to Lynn. Taking the reins of the reopened investigation, he published an appeal in the Manly Daily newspaper, a strategic move that finally coaxed crucial witnesses out of the woodwork. Armed with fresh determination, Loon began the arduous process of rebuilding the case from scratch. With fresh leads coming in, Loon meticulously gathered formal, detailed statements from dozens of individuals whose lives had been affected by the case. In September 1998, he recorded a harrowing 27-page statement from Chris Dawson's former teenage babysitter and second wife, Jenny Carlson, which detailed Chris's grooming, coercive control, and a chilling admission about seeking a hitman to kill Lynn. He also took extensive statements from Lynn's siblings, friends, and former childcare colleagues, documenting a history of domestic violence, Chris's infatuation with the teenager, and his bizarre behavior following Lynn's disappearance. Based on this rebuilt evidence, Loon formally concluded in his own police statement that Lynn had been murdered between 9 p.m. on January 8th and 8 a.m. on January 9th, 1982. Loon also aggressively advanced the physical search for Lynn's remains. On April 7, 1999, he directed a scientific examination of the Bayview property using ground-penetrating radar and specially trained cadaver dogs. When the radar indicated disturbed earth near the in-ground swimming pool, Loon led a targeted dig in 2000 that yielded chilling physical evidence. Buried in the earth was a Popper brand juice container with a 1981 expiry date, alongside the fragmented pieces of a woman's cardigan. Scientific examination of the garment revealed at least 22 cut marks. Forensic experts noted that cuts on the sleeve were specifically consistent with defensive wounds from someone trying to fend off a knife attack. Former crime scene investigator Bob Gibbs, who was present at the 2000 dig, later confirmed that the holes were very consistent with knife marks in a domestic sort of stabbing situation. Preliminary testing of stains on the cardigan also indicated the possible presence of blood, which prompted police to pursue advanced DNA testing to try and identify the source. Despite uncovering this highly suspicious evidence, the 2000 excavation was severely limited by budget constraints. Gibbs revealed that forensics officers were only allowed to search a small area because authorities didn't want us to dig up a whole pool area. This restriction deeply frustrated both Gibbs and Loon, with Gibbs later asserting his firm belief that Lynn's body was still buried there. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. Despite the dig's chilling discovery, advanced DNA testing on the garment proved inconclusive, and police could neither definitively link the clothing to Lynette nor locate her remains anywhere on the property. Because the physical searches failed to produce a body and the police investigation remained ultimately inconclusive, authorities needed a different legal avenue to advance the case. The lack of definitive forensic proof shifted the matter toward the jurisdiction of the coroner's court in February 2001. To facilitate this, Detective Loon and police prosecutor Matt Fordham compiled an extensive brief of evidence that detailed the vast circumstantial case against Chris Dawson, providing the necessary foundation for the coroner to formally accept and review the matter. In the Australian legal system, a coronial inquest is a specialized, court-like public inquiry designed to independently investigate the facts and circumstances surrounding a suspicious death or a missing person case. As former state coroner Michael Barnes explained, an inquest dedicates all of its resources to a single case and examines it through a different legal lens than a standard police probe. During an inquest, lawyers can rigorously test the evidence and are far less likely to accept the basic presumptions or assurances that might otherwise stall regular police work. It is a unique jurisdiction where a coroner can openly consider circumstantial evidence and even ask witnesses for their opinions on what they believe happened, rather than being strictly limited to established facts as in a traditional criminal trial. The approval and execution of the 2001 inquest was driven entirely by the weight of the police brief submitted to the court. Presided over by Deputy State Coroner Jan Stevenson, the public proceedings were remarkably brief, lasting less than half a day, with Detective Loon serving as the sole witness to take the stand. However, after carefully reviewing the extensive police files in her chambers, Coroner Stevenson abruptly terminated the hearing. She formally declared that the evidence established an indictable offense, determining that Lynette Dawson was dead and had most likely been murdered by a known person. This crucial ruling allowed the coroner to officially refer the case to the New South Wales Director of Public Prosecutions, recommending that criminal charges finally be laid. Following Deputy State Coroner Jan Stevenson's 2001 determination and a subsequent 2003 inquest by Deputy State Coroner Karl Milovanovich that reached the exact same conclusion, the New South Wales Director of Public Prosecutions, Nicholas Cowdery QC, steadfastly refused to prosecute. Cowdery determined that the entirely circumstantial nature of the case provided insufficient evidence to secure a criminal conviction. The lack of a body, the absence of a defined crime scene, and unverified reports from Dawson and his acquaintances claiming Lynn had been sighted alive all contributed to the prosecutor's conclusion that the case was too weak to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The prosecutor's refusal to lay charges plunged the case into a deep freeze for more than a decade. With the authorities unwilling to proceed, the police investigation lost its momentum, and the disappearance remained an unresolved mystery until a new unsolved homicide unit took over in 2015. For Lynn's family, this institutional inertia caused profound distress, leaving them feeling completely abandoned by the justice system. The family's frustration over the reliance on dubious sightings to justify the lack of a trial sparked immense anger, prompting them to spend years writing desperate, unsuccessful letters to politicians and the Director of Public Prosecutions begging for action. Ultimately, the justice system's refusal to act inadvertently ignited a global media phenomenon that would change the course of the investigation. The repeated dismissals by the Director of Public Prosecutions served as the direct catalyst for investigative journalist Hedley Thomas to launch the Teacher's Pet podcast in 2018. The release of the podcast in May 2018 immediately unleashed a wave of unprecedented public interest, rapidly becoming a global phenomenon downloaded millions of times. Almost overnight, the journalist's inbox was flooded with tips and leads from listeners, sparking a dynamic investigation where episodes were updated and restructured on the fly to incorporate breaking information. One of the most significant early breakthroughs occurred when former Cromer High Vice Captain Robin Wheeler came forward to expose the toxic culture on Sydney's northern beaches, revealing that a pack of male teachers had been preying on underage female students since the late 1970s. Her courage in speaking out prompted a cascade of other former students to break their silence and share their own dark experiences. Through this grassroots network of alumni, the journalist uncovered chilling new details about Chris Dawson's conduct and the school's complicity. Former student Phil Webster corroborated the explicit nature of Chris and Jenny's relationship on school grounds, describing a highly misogynistic culture where teachers sought hedonistic pleasure with absolute impunity. Michelle Walsh provided a harrowing account from late January 1982, revealing that she had found physical education teacher Leslie Bushy Bush weeping hysterically over Lynn's disappearance. When Chris saw the two conversing, he aggressively cornered the 15-year-old Walsh and menacingly ordered her to keep her mouth shut. Even former Deputy Principal Hilton Mace admitted on the record that several staff members suspected Chris was involved in Lynn's disappearance, but they remained silent out of fear and a misguided belief that it was solely a police matter. The sprawling investigation also unearthed hidden evidence of domestic violence and highly suspicious encounters regarding the Dawson property. Former babysitter Bev McNally revealed she had witnessed Chris violently shove Lynn into a doorframe and whip her with a tea towel over a dirty glass. Magistrate Jeff Linden, Chris's former solicitor, came forward with a chilling revelation that in 1987, Chris had turned up uninvited to his former Bayview home and asked the new owner where they were digging. This sinister detail was supported by concreter Joe Cimino, who worked at the property in the late 1980s, and noted that the soil near the swimming pool was inexplicably soft, like I was cutting a cheesecake, suggesting an over-excavated void that would have been easy to quickly dig up and backfill. The journalist's persistent digging exposed crucial contradictions in Chris's long-held narrative. Kay Sinclair recounted a 2007 conversation at a wake where Chris completely changed his story, claiming Lynn had joined a commune in the Blue Mountains rather than fleeing to the Central Coast. Former Olympic kayaker Shelley Oates Wilding emerged from the shadows to reveal she had been groomed for sex by Paul Dawson, noting that Paul abruptly ended their relationship right after Lynn's disappearance, claiming something terrible had happened. The investigation also unearthed a stunning conflict of interest at the highest levels of the justice system. The New South Wales Director of Public Prosecutions, Lloyd Babb, had attended Asquith Boys High and was coached in rugby league by the Dawson twins in 1983. This revelation shocked Lynn's family, who had been kept in the dark about the connection while Babb's office repeatedly declined to prosecute Chris. Armed with this mounting evidence, the podcast generated intense public pressure, culminating in a subscriber event at Sydney's The Mint, where attendees openly expressed their disgust over the decades of institutional failure. This groundswell ultimately forced the hand of authorities who had previously brushed off the journalists' inquiries. In July 2018, Police Commissioner Mick Fuller met with the journalist in Darlinghurst, leading to an unprecedented agreement to share the podcast's newly discovered leads directly with Homicide Squad detectives. Acknowledging that the podcast had exposed profound historical failures, Fuller subsequently issued a public apology to Lynn's family and established Strikeforce Southwood to formally investigate the organized pedophilia by teachers on the northern beaches, leading to the dramatic police excavations that would commence at Bayview in September. On the early morning of September 12, 2018, a convoy of vehicles carrying heavy excavation equipment rolled into Gilwinga Drive, signaling a major development in the cold case that had haunted Sydney's northern beaches for 36 years. The sound of jackhammers and rock-cutting machinery soon reverberated down the long driveway of Chris and Lynn Dawson's former Bayview home. Standing before a crowd of eager journalists, the head of the homicide squad, Detective Superintendent Scott Cook, sharply dressed in a blue suit and striped tie, explicitly labeled the operation as a search regarding the Lynette Dawson murder. Cook pledged that this excavation would be far more extensive than previous efforts, relying on new technologies to thoroughly investigate 4 specific areas, 3 in the sprawling backyard and a 4th situated around the swimming pool, where subterranean anomalies had been detected. For nearly a week, the high-profile operation captivated the nation and fueled the hopes of local residents and Lynn's loved ones, who were convinced that Chris had buried his wife on the rocky property. However, the agonizing anticipation ultimately ended in bitter disappointment. After 6 days of intensive digging that cost taxpayers more than $1 million, Grant Williams, the New South Wales police media manager, delivered the crushing news that the search was a complete bust. A formal police statement confirmed that authorities had failed to locate Lynette's remains or any items of investigative interest. The area of soft soil, outside the children's bedroom windows, which had been the subject of long-standing suspicion, proved to be soft only near the surface, with too much impenetrable rock beneath it to conceal a grave. Similarly, despite excavating the earth alongside the swimming pool to a depth of about 6 feet, the forensic team unearthed nothing more than ordinary dirt and rocks. While the physical search was a bust, the New South Wales Police and the Director of Public Prosecutions, DPP, had been reviewing an updated brief of evidence that was initially submitted in April 2018 that included considerable new evidence thanks to the podcast global reach. Detectives took statements from at least 16 additional witnesses after the show began airing in May 2018, bringing crucial new testimony into the police brief. The definitive tipping point occurred when a career criminal and former Newtown Jets teammate of Chris Dawson came forward. On November 9, 2018, he provided a formal police statement alleging that Chris had approached him back in 1975 to ask about hiring a hitman to kill Lynn, corroborating Jenny's claims. This accumulation of fresh witness testimonies helped turn what the DPP had previously deemed an insufficient circumstantial case into a prosecutable one. In early December 2018, the DPP formally advised police that there was finally sufficient evidence to charge Chris Dawson with murder. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. On December 5, 2018, the decades-long cold case reached a dramatic turning point when detectives from the Queensland Police arrested a 70-year-old Chris Dawson on the Gold Coast for the murder of his first wife, Lynette. When the knock on the door finally came, the former physical education teacher reportedly remained calm, having known for a long time that this day might eventually arrive. The following day, authorities extradited Dawson to New South Wales to formally face the charges. During his initial appearance at Sydney's Central Local Court, the presiding magistrate described the matter as a cold case murder and denied Dawson's first application for bail, citing him as a high-flight risk and remanding him in custody. Outside the Sydney court, his highly experienced defense solicitor, Greg Walsh, wasted no time launching a staunch public defense, asserting his client's absolute innocence and intention to plead not guilty. Walsh began seeding the narrative that Lynn Dawson might have voluntarily started a new life, citing a historical case where a woman vanished to New Zealand for 60 years before her family discovered her fate. To bolster this theory, he pointed to uninvestigated bank card transactions from January 1982, arguing that police failures to properly follow up on these purchases had severely prejudiced his client. Despite this early setback, Dawson's legal team quickly mobilized to secure his freedom. On December 17th, a second bail application proved successful, allowing Dawson to be released from custody after his family posted a staggering $1.5 million surety. The court imposed strict conditions on his release, requiring the former rugby league star to surrender his passport to Queensland police and reside exclusively with his third wife, Susan. Central to the defense's strategy was a concerted attack on the media, specifically the Teacher's Pet podcast. Walsh publicly condemned the reporting as stemming from an ideological perspective that he must be guilty, arguing that the intense media scrutiny had distorted witnesses' memories. By mid-February 2019, Walsh escalated this approach by announcing his intention to call journalist Hedley Thomas to a committal hearing. He explicitly accused Thomas of contaminating witnesses through multiple interviews and by sharing others' statements, asserting that this deliberate journalistic conduct seriously prejudiced Dawson's entitlement to a fair trial. This aggressive legal maneuvering swiftly impacted those who had investigated the case. To comply with the Crown's strict disclosure obligations, police moved to seize the underlying investigative materials generated by researchers and journalists. Just days before Christmas in 2018, two detectives paid a surprise visit to the Northern Beaches home of author Rebecca Hazel, demanding the handover of all her working files, manuscript drafts, interview notes, and communications spanning 7 years of research. By early 2019, Thomas had handed over more than 100 gigabytes of raw audio files, alongside thousands of emails, text messages, and social media exchanges with sources, providing the defense team with a massive trove of documents to mine for inconsistencies. Meanwhile, the arrest triggered vastly different emotional reactions within the fractured Dawson and Sims families. For Lynn's relatives, the development brought a profound sense of relief after decades of frustration. A tension momentarily broken when Greg and Marilyn Sims found themselves rolling around laughing at a satirical Batuta Advocate article claiming Paul Dawson had arrested himself so he could share a cell with his twin. Throughout these rapid legal developments, Dawson and his family vehemently maintained his innocence, releasing a public statement asserting that there was clear, uncontested evidence Lynette was still alive long after she supposedly walked out on her husband and 2 young daughters. Standing firm on his denials, Dawson formally entered a plea of not guilty in the local court of New South Wales in June 2019, which ultimately paved the way for his committal proceedings in February 2020, where he was officially ordered to stand trial for the historic murder. On the morning of May 16, 2022, 73-year-old Chris Dawson walked into the law courts of New South Wales in Sydney, marking the beginning of his highly anticipated Supreme Court murder trial. Presided over by Justice Ian Harrison SC in a judge-alone trial, the proceedings sought to finally answer the decades-old mystery of what happened to the devoted mother of 2, Lynette Dawson. Crown Prosecutor Craig Everson SC opened the trial by laying out a chilling, wholly circumstantial case, arguing that Dawson was driven to murder his wife by an overpowering infatuation with his teenage student and babysitter, Jenny Carlson, desiring an unfettered relationship with her. Over the ensuing weeks, the court was transported back to the early 1980s through a relentless procession of witnesses. Lynn's neighbor, Julie Andrew, testified about hearing Dawson screaming at a wailing Lynn over the backyard fence, while Lynn's sister, Pat Jenkins, recounted Lynn's distress over her husband's flashing black eyes and constant anger. Lynn's brother, Greg Sims, detailed the grim discovery of Lynn's intimate belongings, including her nursing badges and dirty gardening gloves, stuffed into garbage bags dumped at their parents' home. The prosecution's star witness, Jenny, took the stand to recount a harrowing tale of grooming and coercive control. She testified that Dawson referred to his wife as fatso, mixed drinks that made Lynn fall asleep so he could pursue sex with Jenny in the family home. She also detailed the eerie aftermath of Lynn's disappearance, revealing how she was moved into Lynn's bed, assumed her maternal duties, and was even given a wedding ring fashioned from the diamonds of Lynn's own engagement ring. The Crown bolstered this narrative with testimony from Lynn's childcare colleagues, former Cromer High students, and homicide detectives. They even brought forward Robert Silkman, a criminally connected former rugby teammate, though his testimony was fiercely attacked by the defense due to his extensive criminal history. Helena Sims never lived to see her former son-in-law stand trial for the murder of her daughter, having passed away heartbroken at the age of 85 in September 2001, just 6 months after the first coronial inquest into Lynn's disappearance concluded. Yet, more than 2 decades after her death, Helena's voice echoed powerfully through Supreme Court 9D. Crown Prosecutor Craig Everson SC utilized her meticulous, handwritten diaries as a real-time record of the tragedy, reading several dozen extracts into the court record to establish Chris Dawson's escalating cruelty and motives. These poignant entries offered a devastating window into the rapid deterioration of the Dawson marriage. In an entry from October 1981, Helena observed the creeping presence of the teenage babysitter, noting that the schoolgirl had become Chris's shadow and that Lynn was left very unhappy, almost in tears about Chris. As the year drew to a close, Dawson's contempt for his wife became chillingly explicit in the diaries. Helena documented a Christmas party at the Sims family home in Clovelly on the 6th of December 1981, where Chris coldly told his mother-in-law, "I only want to look after my 2 little girls." Helena asked what would become of Lynn. Chris brutally replied, "She can get in the bloody kitchen where she belongs." The final, perhaps most haunting entry presented to the court captured the last time Helena ever heard her daughter's voice. Lynn's final phone call with her mother took place on the evening of Friday, 8th of January 1982, just hours before she disappeared. When Helena called the house at Gilwinga Drive that night, Chris Dawson was reportedly reluctant to let Lynn come to the phone until Helena insisted. During the conversation, Lynn sounded very groggy, or a little bit funny, leading Helena to simply note in her diary that her daughter sounded half-sozzled. Despite her altered state, Lynn spoke optimistically about her marriage. Following a counseling session earlier that day, she reassured her mother, "Everything's going to be all right, Mum. We're going to work it out." Lynn also explained the reason for her grogginess, saying, "Chris has made me a lovely drink." This detail about the lovely drink carried a deeply sinister implication. Lynn was not typically a drinker. While Chris had previously mixed alcoholic drinks for Lynn to make her sleepy so he could secretly pursue sexual relations with Jenny, she was not in the house that night. Because his usual motive for sedating his wife was absent, the drink he gave her on the night she vanished raised grave suspicions. Defense barrister Pauline David vigorously countered the murder allegations, insisting Dawson had only failed as a husband. She floated the theories that Lynn had voluntarily abandoned her family to start anew, or had tragically taken her own life. The defense heavily leaned on an argument that the podcast, The Teacher's Pet, had irredeemably contaminated witness memories, subjecting journalist Hedley Thomas to intense cross-examination over his motivations and journalistic methods. In a bizarre final twist, the defense called Paul Cooper, a witness who claimed he had a drink with a woman matching Lynn's description, at a Lake Macquarie pub weeks after she vanished, where she supposedly confessed to leaving her husband and children behind. The marathon proceedings culminated on August 30th, 2022, when Justice Harrison delivered his meticulous, hours-long judgment. Addressing the wholly circumstantial nature of the Crown's case, the judge dismantled the 40 years of detritus, rejecting Dawson's version of events and giving no weight to the defense's purported sightings of Lynn. By stripping away the alternate hypotheses through logic and human experience, Justice Harrison concluded that Lynette Dawson was faultless and undeserving of her fate, finding Chris Dawson guilty of murder. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. Christopher Michael Dawson was handcuffed and led into the glass-paneled dock, appearing to observers like a wounded animal being dragged to his fate. Unbeknownst to Dawson in those moments, his conviction had sparked spontaneous applause, cheers, and hooting from the overflow crowd gathered in the nearby Banco court. Months later, on December 2nd, 2022, Justice Harrison sentenced the former physical education teacher and rugby league star to 24 years in prison, stipulating a non-parole period of 18 years. During the sentencing, Justice Harrison highlighted the objective seriousness of the crime, describing Dawson's motives as selfish and cynical. The judge acknowledged that Dawson's advancing age and deteriorating health would make his incarceration particularly onerous, but noted the harsh reality that he would probably die in jail before ever reaching his parole eligibility date. Dawson's legal fate was further sealed by the October 2022 passage of the No Body, No Parole legislation in New South Wales, colloquially known as Lynn's Law. This reform dictates that Dawson cannot be granted parole unless he cooperates in locating his wife's remains, effectively ensuring that without a confession, he will spend his final days behind bars. During the sentencing phase, the court heard agonizing victim impact statements, including a powerful address from his eldest daughter, Chanel, who faced her father in the dock and begged him to reveal her mother's location to grant the family a final measure of peace. Dawson's legal reckoning did not end with the murder trial. In 2023, he faced the courts again for a historical charge of carnal knowledge relating to the sexual relationship he initiated in 1980 with his 16-year-old student. Following a judge-alone trial, Judge Sarah Huggett found him guilty in June 2023, noting that Dawson had deliberately groomed the vulnerable teenager, transporting her to his parents' empty house to engage in sexual acts, and commanding her to keep their relationship a secret. For this offense, he received an additional 3-year prison sentence, which added another year to his non-parole period. The victim in this case subsequently launched a civil lawsuit against the New South Wales Department of Education for failing to protect her from Dawson's predatory behavior, a matter which was settled in December 2023. Refusing to accept his fate, Dawson launched a series of relentless but ultimately unsuccessful appeals from behind bars. In May 2024, his legal team challenged the murder conviction before the New South Wales Court of Criminal Appeal, arguing that he had suffered a significant forensic disadvantage due to the 40-year delay in prosecution and that the trial judge had erred in assessing his lies as consciousness of guilt. The appellate court unanimously dismissed this challenge in June 2024, concluding that no substantial miscarriage of justice had occurred and that Dawson's actions were utterly irreconcilable with any belief that his wife might return. The High Court of Australia later refused him special leave to appeal the decision. He also attempted to overturn his carnal knowledge conviction, but that appeal was dismissed by a majority decision in the Court of Criminal Appeal in June 2025. Today, the 77-year-old Dawson resides as a prisoner at the Long Bay Correctional Center, situated near the Maroubra neighborhood where he spent his childhood. His life as an inmate has been fraught with the consequences of his infamy, as he has faced regular vilification and threats of violence from other prisoners. With his first possible release date pushed to August 2041, when he would be 93 years old, and stringent parole laws requiring a confession he refuses to provide, Dawson's reality is a permanent loss of freedom. He remains resolute in his silence regarding the whereabouts of Lynette's body, living out his final years in the austere confines of the prison system after nearly 4 decades of evading justice. The conviction of Chris Dawson in August 2022 brought a long-awaited albeit bittersweet resolution to a saga that had haunted Sydney's northern beaches for 40 years, leaving the Sims and Dawson families permanently fractured. For the family of Lynette Dawson, who officially reclaimed her maiden name, Lynette Joy Sims, on the steps of the Supreme Court following the guilty verdict, the outcome offered profound relief. Her brother Greg Sims, sister Pat Jenkins, and sister-in-law Marilyn had campaigned tirelessly for decades, enduring the heartbreak of watching Lynette's parents, Helena and Len, and her eldest brother Phil, pass away before seeing justice served. While Greg expressed gratitude that he would never have to see Christopher Michael Dawson again, the family remained suspended in a state of unresolved grief. Bound by Dawson's refusal to disclose the location of Lynette's remains, meaning her family is still denied the dignity of laying her to rest. The Dawson family, meanwhile, has splintered under the weight of the murder conviction and the subsequent 2023 guilty verdict for carnal knowledge of a student. His third wife, Susan, with whom he lived a comfortable beachside life in Queensland prior to his arrest, officially divorced him in 2023, while his older brother Peter and identical twin Paul remained staunchly by his side throughout the legal ordeal, with Paul even shoving a television cameraman outside the courthouse on the day of the murder verdict. The wider family has felt the stigma of the intense global scrutiny. The adult children of their brother Gary have actively distanced themselves from their infamous uncles, telling curious friends they are no longer related. Paul himself appeared on national television in late 2023 to emphatically deny historical allegations of grooming a schoolgirl. For the women caught in the center of Dawson's control, the aftermath of the trial has been a complex journey of trauma and estrangement. Joanne Curtis, the former teenage babysitter known as Jenny, carried the immense burden of giving pivotal evidence against the man who groomed her. Deeply scarred by her teenage experiences and the realization that she had been used to replace a murdered woman, she has lived with profound guilt, once weeping to a friend that the tragedy wouldn't have happened except for me. Though she was instrumental in ultimately bringing Dawson to justice by fleeing the marriage and alerting authorities in 1990, the intense pressure of the podcast and looming trial caused her to retreat from some close friendships, choosing instead to quietly navigate the trauma of her past. Perhaps the most tragic legacy of the murder lies in the polarized lives of Lynette's two daughters, Chanel and Amy, who were raised in an environment of deception and told their mother had abandoned them because she did not love them. Chanel, the eldest, bravely confronted her father in court during his sentencing, delivering a harrowing victim impact statement. She told Dawson that his selfish actions destroyed her sense of safety and robbed her of a loving role model, but declared that she refused to carry his burdens any longer, focusing instead on reclaiming her life and raising her own daughter. Her younger sister Amy has remained fiercely loyal to her father and alienated from the Sims side of the family. Viewing the media investigations and prosecution as a conspiratorial witch hunt, Amy has publicly directed her anger toward Jenny, accusing her former stepmother of fabricating lies to destroy her father. Today, the sisters remain tragically estranged, embodying the generational damage inflicted by their father's crimes.